The Mortuary Assistant is the scariest game I've played in 2022. Do you know what? In fact, it's one of the scariest games I've ever played. Period. Developed by Darkstone Digital, it takes what's already a pretty unsettling profession, working the graveyard shift at a mortuary, and then makes it even more frightening, adding in the lingering threat of demonic possession. Now, I first heard about this game on Twitter where people were posting a bunch of clips from it, and the creature designs alone were enough to get me interested. But then, once I'd bought it and sunk a few hours into it, my only regret was that I hadn't picked it up sooner.
Are you sure?
So many horror games these days rely on trending memes for relevance, or in the case of all those crappy budget horror titles on Steam, they always seem to involve running around some kind of environment, collecting an arbitrary amount of items, whilst avoiding a monster that can kill you in a single hit. Ah! So it's really refreshing to play something like this that feels like it's taken a different approach to the genre, relying more on the atmosphere and world building than just loud noises and scripted death animations.
You get used to it.
Now, the premise of the game is pretty simple to explain. You're a woman named Rebecca who's given a full-time position as a mortuary's assistant, working for Dolph Lundgren, it seems.
I must break you.
I wish I could claim to be someone better.
Called into work on a rainy night, only to be told that she's marked for possession by a demon. Yeah, not the best way to start a shift.
Look, this isn't funny. Stop.
The only way to prevent this is to burn the body that the demon's hiding in. Which does sound simple, but first you gotta figure out which body the demon's using, out of 3 in total, and then also discover the demon's name. All whilst coming to grips with the correct procedure you have to go through to get the body ready for cremation. It almost kind of reminded me a bit of Phasmophobia, in the way you've got all this very realistic looking equipment and have to work your way through this checklist of procedures. And if you're grossed out by body horror alone, well, then this whole facet of the game is definitely going to make you queasy. But the real scares here come from the countless randomly generated hauntings and the other off-putting visions you're going to experience.
This is ridiculous.
Most of which are enough to make you just Alt F4 right out of the game. And the fact that these are different each time you play means you never quite know what to expect. It seems that so many horror games these days, especially indie horror games, just rely on loud noises and jump scares. And I mean, look, to be fair, there are times when this can be used to great effect. But most times it's more of a crutch to pass itself off as horror in lieu of actually building up to something genuine. It's kind of the reason why I hate games like Outlast, where the horror aspect in that is about as subtle as walking up to someone and slapping them in the face with a wet sock. I think the best example of how jump scares don't even need to be scary to be effective is in Citizen Kane, where halfway into the movie during a random scene transition, Orson Welles just thought he'd put up a screeching cockatoo. Now, obviously, he had his reasons for putting that into the movie, but when you bring it back to horror, it just kind of encapsulates how not much effort needs to go into these to trick someone into thinking they're being scared by it. I guess my point is that Mortuary Assistant doesn't do this. I mean, yeah, it has its jump scares, but this time it feels like they're earned. In fact, most of the time it pretty much announces when it's going to happen, so there's a build-up and expectation there, which makes it feel less cheap. What little music there is subtle and effective, and it does a great job at setting up the atmosphere, instead of trying to ram it down your throat.
That's very disturbing.
It doesn't rely on being super gory either, and I think about the most you're ever going to see here is the whole surgical aspect of cutting up all these dead bodies. The first time you load up the game, it even has this fake warning message about seeking out assistance if you start experiencing paranormal events after you start playing. And I mean, that right there is some deep-ass fourth wall breaking mind fuckery.
I'm sorry, but it doesn't end here.
And that's really what this game excels at, is messing with the player's head.
God damn!
Like putting things off in the corner of your eyes, having something move past a doorway or a window, and generally just making you feel uneasy the entire time. You'll hear doors slamming, voices whispering your name, or even more blatant events like all the lockers in the cold storage room slamming loudly. And of course, when you run in there, it all just conveniently stops. Even something as simple as a door being shut moments after you just saw it open is an effective tactic to make sure your asshole is tight enough to crush walnuts. The thing that consistently made me jump in this game was when I turn around and see one of these lesser spirits just watching me. You see, aside from that demon itself, you've also got 3 of these lesser spirits haunting you. Thankfully too, these aren't based off awful copypasta or cringeworthy SCP entries. Oh, fuck me! And despite these spirits often not making any kind of noise, I lost count the amount of times that I turned around and saw one of them watching me from the other side of the room, and it never failed to make me feel my trousers. There were times too when I didn't even notice these during the game, and it wasn't even until I was going through my footage later on that I'd finally pick it up, and that right there sent a shiver down my spine every time. Now, this could have been a really annoying feature, like they could have played some kind of lame Five Nights at Freddy's jump scare effect every time you saw one of these guys. But it actually gets to the point where you almost keep forgetting that it's a thing, so when you turn around and see someone ducking behind a desk again, it always manages to catch you off guard. Another big part of the gameplay is the demon trying to mess with the player's head too. Like the phone might ring, for instance, giving you a nasty little message on the other end.
Hello?
Who is your daddy and what does he do?
And look, if horror movies have taught me one thing, it's that you should never answer a ringing phone. The mortuary is divided into 2 buildings. You've got a front office area and then the back room where the bodies are kept, and between both buildings is a hallway that's got windows on each side. And I found this to be the most unsettling room because I kept expecting to look out the window and see someone looking in. Your imagination is often scarier than what reality can conjure, and constantly expecting something to pop up is almost as frightening as the event itself. Eventually, even the routine sounds start to make you uneasy, like the noise the embalming pump makes when you turn it on is so loud and sudden that it's almost like a jump scare in itself. Especially by the time when you're used to being in this environment where you can pretty much hear a pin drop. Oh, but the worst bit was this one sequence where you get this vision of Rebecca's grandma just appearing at a nearby window. It wasn't loud or startling at first anyway, but just that eerie sound of a familiar voice freaked me out more than anything else in the entire game.
Bullshit!
This is almost the kind of thing that if you showed it to someone without any context, they'd almost probably think it's a bit silly and maybe even a bit stupid, but that's kind of the magic of how well the atmosphere works in this game. I mean, you become so engrossed into it and on the edge of your seat the entire time that the sight of a familiar face being used in such a twisted way is enough to really fuck around with your head. It's kind of like Father Merrin says in The Exorcist, the demon is a liar.
We may ask what is relevant, but anything beyond that is dangerous.
Yeah, and if he also tries to get you involved in some kind of pyramid scheme, yeah, don't listen. The scares do take their time though, so look, if you're the kind of horror fan who just wanted to fast forward through Human Centipede to the scene where everyone has to shit in each other's mouths, well, then this ain't the game for you. People who appreciate a slow burn though, no pun intended, and a game that's going to take its time to really get under your skin are going to find a lot to appreciate here. What's the downside to all of this? Well, it's not really a downside, but I guess the catch is that despite everything else going on here, you're still going to be doing the exact same thing when it comes to treating these bodies. Every single time.
Alright.
Each shift you've got 3 bodies to get through as you're trying to figure out which one is possessed, and each time you just do the same routine. You take the body out of cold storage, you put the body on the tray, you check the body over for identifying marks, you sew the mouth shut and then stick the eye caps in. Now that's the first part.
There we go.
Next, you got to search around the room for 4 chemicals needed to fill the body with embalming fluid, including a mysterious reagent that's supposed to banish the demon. And until you memorize where all of these are, you're going to be fumbling through the shelves and cupboards like a crazy person. Finally, you fill the body with cavity fluid, clean the tank out, put the lotion on the skin, and then wheel the body back to cold storage before dragging out another one and just repeating the process. And each time you complete a task, Rebecca chimes in with this oddly positive remark, which I kind of find out of place considering the kind of shit that she's been seeing.
There we go. There we go. Alright.
At first, this can be pretty confusing. You've even got a clipboard which has a whole bunch of bullet points on it, but then, almost kind of like a real job, you start to get into a rhythm of remembering where everything's kept and getting through that checklist without even having to check your notes. I feel like this whole mechanic alone could have almost served as its own game entirely, like it could have been called just Mortuary Assistant Simulator, and even held its place amongst all those other simulators on Steam that seem to come out every couple of days now. But you'll easily spend the most time doing this stuff, and it's also entirely necessary because only by treating these bodies can you progress further along it being possessed, which is what reveals more clues to the demon's name. As the night goes on, you'll start finding sigils around the building, randomly generated for each shift, and eventually you can then ascertain the demon's name by going through a very late 90s looking website on a computer in the office, which has got the most obvious Netscape Navigator inspired browser that I've ever seen. You can eventually figure out what the demon's name is with only 3 sigils, and if you're super lucky, there's tells that the demon has to give it away early too. Burning ash on a body's chest gives you the demon's house name, and you've also got a 1 in 3 chance of getting this right as well. But regardless, you still need to treat at least 2 of the 3 bodies to get to that stage. And I guess my point there is that if you don't enjoy this aspect of the game, which look is fair enough, well, then all the well-crafted and scripted hauntings aren't gonna mean jack shit, because you're probably not engaged enough to really care.
There we go.
Personally, I do kind of think that treating the bodies is more of an extension to the horror aspect, you know, because it kind of forces you to focus on a single object, which means you can't really pay attention to your surroundings, making it that much more scary when something happens outside of your field of view. But I can definitely see how this component might turn a few people off, and I mean, even watching a mate play through the demo, him simply trying to find the chemicals for the embalming fluid was confusing enough. It doesn't help that the controls aren't all that great here either. Moving that gurney around is slow and clunky, and you've really got to put your back into the mouse to rotate that thing around. I get that that's maybe the point. I mean, moving a gurney around with a dead body on it isn't like picking up a pack of potato chips, but it was really clunky, and it kind of made me think like there was something wrong with my mouse settings. Using all the various tools is kind of easy once you get the hang of it, but it's really unintuitive at first, which again, I can see pissing off a lot of people. Like the first time I had to use this needle injector, I just had no idea what I was supposed to do with it. Turns out you have to drag this slider all the way up. Then click on this circle to hammer it down, which, you know, might seem obvious now that I'm saying it out loud, but the game never instructs you to use it like that. At least if it did, well, I sure missed it. You can only ever hold on to 2 heavy items at once, which kind of forces you to use these items one at a time, but then they also vanish after being used, which is kind of weird. Plus, it can also be very buggy, and I often got locked out of even being able to perform basic tasks, requiring pretty much a complete restart.
I can't use that here.
The game autosaves at the beginning of each body, so that's not too much time lost, but to simply not be able to mix chemicals in the embalming machine for the 10th time, for no apparent reason, is just really frustrating.
I can't use that here.
Lastly, what I think is kind of weird is that regardless of if you've burned the right body or not, the end animation is always the same. The body you're burning inside the furnace always bursts out, which kind of makes no sense to me if it wasn't the correct one. I mean, why would it move around like this? I guess that's a minor gripe, but it's kind of weird I think to not include multiple animations, considering they still took the time to include 5 separate endings.
From now on, there is always a chance this will happen again.
I guess I can also see the price turning off a lot of people too, and yeah, I guess a $40 price tag for an indie game made by one person might seem a bit high, but you know what, I really don't think that's too much of an issue. I mean, each shift might only take half an hour or so to get through, but the game has multiple endings, right? 5 in total, and these will definitely take repeat attempts.
Alright, here we go.
And along with just trying to complete a shift, you're also getting these visions into Rebecca's backstory, showing her whole history of substance abuse, which I gotta say I think is more interesting than the demonic possession itself. Yeah man, if you like your character backstories delivered in ambiguous dreamlike fashion, well then this is the game for you.
It's not a life I would want for anyone.
I think the best horror games are the ones that leave you scared even when you stop playing. I still remember that after an hour-long session of 5 Nights at Freddy's for the first time, that I legitimately had trouble sleeping that night. In the apartment that I lived in at the time, my bedroom had a hallway which led into the living room. And from my position where I was sleeping in my bed, the layout of my room looked kinda similar to the security area in the game. And I kept waking up that night and thinking I'd see Freddy standing at my doorway. The Mortuary Assistant kind of had the same effect on me after the first time I stopped playing it. I realised it was close to midnight by the time I'd finished, and at that point my wife was asleep and the entire house was pitch black.
What am I supposed to do then?
And as I walked around the house brushing my teeth and, you know, getting ready for bed, my mind couldn't help but start picturing something out of the corner of my eye. You know, something watching me and waiting for me to notice it before scurrying behind a piece of furniture. And that's when I knew that the horror in this game was something special. I mean, look man, I've played so many of those crappy horror games on Steam, and so many of them you play for an hour or so with your mates and you never touch again. You know, almost forgetting that they even exist to begin with. Oh, fuck me! The Mortuary Assistant, though, wasn't one of those games to me, and I think the fact that it creeped me out well after I'd stopped playing it, you know, considering I'm a 36-year-old man, is a bit of a testament to the kind of atmosphere and the lasting effect that its horror aspects have. After playing for a few hours, you'll start to feel like you've seen all there is to see here, which is fair enough, I guess. But for those first few shifts, Mortuary Assistant provides some of the best genuine horror you're ever going to see in a video game. So go buy it. Now.
All right,